Hello, I'm Richard Long, the Executive Director of the Learning First Alliance. The Learning First Alliance is a partnership of leading education organizations representing more than 10 million members dedicated to improving student learning in America's public schools. We share examples of success, encourage collaboration, and work towards the continual and long-term improvement of public education based on solid research. Today, as part of our Public Schools Week, which is February 21 to 25 in 2022, we have as our guest for this podcast, Jennifer Wolfe, who's a high school teacher of the social sciences in Oceanside, Long Island. She grew up in upstate New York, went to a very small college in Indiana, and is also a graduate of a very small public school in New York. Jennifer, it's great to be with you. But what brought you to being a teacher?
I think because I didn't like high school all that much, to be honest. I had all the appearances of really liking school. I was on a couple of varsity athletic teams. I was class president for 4 years. I had a lot of friends, but I always felt like there was something missing and I wanted more. And I went to Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana. I got a degree in international studies, and my focus was Western Europe pretty much. And I really loved all that learning, and I wanted to travel and to be able to do whatever I decided to do anywhere in the world. And so I thought I was going to end up being a war correspondent until my dad let me know that he didn't like the idea that it was so dangerous. And so I started at home for abused and neglected kids, and I fell in love with them.
Tough work.
It was super hard. I made no money. I think I was paid $13,000 a year or something.
Yeah. Oh, and the whole thing, huh?
It was great. I was like, woo! But I fell in love with them, and I realized that their only way out was with an education, and the power of learning and of achieving a high school diploma and beyond really transforms lives. And I wanted to be a part of that. So I wanted to help kids. And I love to learn, and it seemed like the perfect fit for me.
That's wonderful. And what you found rewarding working with small groups of highly troubled kids or highly traumatized kids, we would say today. Mm-hmm. How about now? What do you find rewarding?
Honestly, the same exact thing. I mean, these kids, especially now after the last 2.5 school years, they need school. They need their teachers. They need to come to school and be with other people who are feeling the same way that they're feeling. And they need to hear from me and the rest of their teachers that we've got them, that we're going to keep pushing through, putting one foot in front of the other, and that when they trip and fall, or if they're having a hard time, that we're here to get them. I think there is no better reward for me than when a student says, thank you, or I just actually got an email from a kid yesterday just thanking me for being there when she was having a particularly hard time in school and she was upset and she was crying in the hallway, and I stopped to ask her, how are you doing? And then try to get her some help. And I think to myself, it's a very easy thing to do. When you ask any teacher, that's a no-brainer. Of course you would stop and help people, but it means so much to those kids when you see them and you really help them, you know.
The engagement that you're talking about is part of what we're highlighting in Public Schools Week this year, and also the concept of safety and equity as three pillars that are all interlinked.
So important.
We're having this conversation before the pandemic. What would you say is different between then and now?
I would say that effective teachers know that knowing their students and what their students need and meeting their students where they are the cornerstones of an effective education, where kids are then engaged and you are creating lessons around their needs. And that kind of work is what leads to student growth, right? And learning. Today, I would say that you certainly need those things, but you also have to now prioritize social emotional learning, infuse it in every lesson that you do, because most of those kids in your room today have experienced trauma. It doesn't matter if you're working in a rural school or a suburban school or an urban school, if you've got all the resources in the world or not enough resources. These kids, after this past year and a half, have experienced trauma in one way or another. Parents are sick, or people they've lost, or the loss of school, not being able to be in a building with their peers and their teachers. All of that has really traumatized them. And so I think now I certainly focus more on making sure that I am constantly checking in, that I'm creating lessons where they are talking to one another and not on a device, where I am giving them feedback, where they're getting lots of one-on-one time. That is really important to them right now because they have been so isolated, or at least felt so isolated, that our lessons need to be much more interactive and in tune with those challenges that they're facing.
The word interactive is interesting because frequently when we hear that word now, it's around technology. And you've very
Yeah, right.
explicitly said that it wasn't technology at this juncture.
No, that's the crazy part. For the first time ever, this is my 25th year of teaching. And for the first time ever, before the bell rings, my students come in and they're on their phones. They're not talking to one another. They're not asking me questions. I mean, normally you come into my room before the bell rings and I've got like a little beehive of kids and they're asking questions or they're talking to me. And now they just come in and they sit and they talk to no one and they're on their phones. And there are a lot of great things about the internet and about the knowledge you can gain and the new technological skills that kids need and all that. It isolates them. And they need to be interacting with their peers one-on-one and looking people in the eye and learning to have conversations again. And so that kind of interaction that I do is around interpersonal skills, right? And cooperating and collaborating and coaching and facilitating, teaching them how to interact again, really, with other people.
That's fascinating because I've not heard that. It makes perfect sense to me. We're interacting over Zoom and technology, which is giving us a great leg up. So it's obvious the tool has its place, but You're right, there are limits to the tool. How are your colleagues finding this? I mean, you talked about how you have noticed this and moving forward. How about your colleagues?
I will say the one positive about the context that we've been teaching in over the last year and a half or 2 years of class has been that everyone has been talking more to one another. We've spent a lot more time with each other at night or in lunch periods, talking a lot about our students and the challenges that we're facing, that they're facing, possible solutions. So that's been actually really great because although here in Oceanside, I've always had a very collegial department, we've always shared, but this it just seems like the need to share is more acute and that we all need it. It's not just the new teachers. It's not just the people who are career changers, but it's all teachers need it. And they're saying the same things I am. The kids are exhausted. I can't get this kid to pick up his head. He's not up late at night. I've spoken to his mother. He's just, and you can see they are mentally exhausted. They talk about how the kids can't write for long periods of time because we've been typing for the last 18 months or whatever it's been. And kids are still taking paper and pen tests and they cannot write for longer than 15 or 20 minutes. A lot of them haven't written in a long time. So their handwriting is horrendous and you can't read it. They talk about how it's very hard for students to pay attention for long periods of time without a device. That they need a device every 10 or 15 minutes because they can just see their eyes glaze over and you've lost them. When we talk about learning loss, I think there's a couple of things that people are really saying. One, in my opinion, yes, I think there probably was some learning loss with elementary in a way that those years are very building blocky, right? So you learn certain skills and they build upon each other year after year. So I certainly have heard from first and second grade teachers that the kids are coming to school, especially in first grade and in kindergarten, there are some that are not potty trained, right? There's some that don't know their alphabet when in a normal year, that would already be taken care of. So there is, I think, some truth to that. But what I have found is that my students are not necessarily lacking content knowledge. They are lacking the knowledge on how to be a student or what we used to think was being a student. Coming to school with your paper and your pens and your homework done and responding to deadlines and studying for tests. My students are all struggling with that. And I teach upper level, middle class, pre-AP and AP students, and they are having trouble. I had a girl the other day take an exam, and I gave them like a little baby unit test. It was like 25 questions and one short answer, where normally it would have been an essay and 40 questions, and it would have been over 2 days. She completed the test, but then she ended up in the hallway. She goes, I need to take a walk. And I said, fine, go ahead. And she gets in the hallway, and I come out there, and she's sitting down sobbing. And I said, what's the matter? She goes, I don't know. I just feel so anxious about the test. I can't. They are not themselves. It's like everybody wants to act like this year is a normal year, but it is not normal. And pretending that it is, to be frank, is causing more damage than just accepting the fact that we're all coming to this teaching and learning this year with some damage and some broken parts. And we've got to figure out how to help each other get back together.
You've defined several of the academic issues that people have brought forward, is social emotional learning, but the anxiety, the depression. But this concept of loss of pedagogical skills among the learners is interesting, because you've also mirrored it a little bit with saying your colleagues are also reaching out to one another. Yes. and trying to define this.
Yeah.
How about the parents? What are you seeing with the parents?
Well, in general, I would say that my parents are very appreciative that we are focusing on the social emotional health of the students, and that we find ways to infuse SEL into every lesson. So it doesn't matter if I'm teaching about classical Persia, I can still teach that content, but hey, let's do some kind of group learning around that, or let's figure out how we write an article all together, or let's find a way to do a podcast with you and your best friend on the topic. So we find ways to, integrate SEL. So they do really appreciate that. I will say that I've had parents write me emails asking for less work to be done on devices, that they're trying to limit their kids' use of devices. And could I please limit the use of device? And that's hard, because we spent a whole year retrofitting our entire practice to be online. And now some of those stuff I really liked, like I really collecting homework online and not live, so I don't lose any papers. Plus everything's date and time stamps, so I can't get any things that turned in on time when I know they're not. And I really like being able to assign things to kids online. And there's so many great resources, so it's not all bad, obviously. But parents are worried because their kids are constantly on their device. Now, are they on my device doing my homework? They're probably on Instagram and Snapchat and, God forbid, that TikTok, right? So they're all on all those things. They might not just be on my stuff. But kids, again, have retreated to the one thing that was their lifeline during the pandemic.
I had a new teacher in a rural high school in Southern Virginia mention to me in passing that his kids are frequently sitting in their chair, and last year they liked being at home. And this year they're not really thinking that school is the way out for them.
Yep.
And they've seen an alternative, and they like the alternative better.
The thing is, public school, right, is supposed to be, according to Justice Breyer, right, the public schools are the nurseries of democracy. And so what we do together is we give everyone, no matter what their background is, a similar experience, so that there is something that binds this country of all different kinds of peoples and nations together. We're all learning about the Constitution together. It doesn't matter what our background is, or ethnicity, or religion, or gender. And so I worry about the future of public education in light of this pandemic and the pushback that we've received from parents and community members. You see it in Board of Ed meetings. They're angry about things we're not even doing in classes. And I fear that if we lose that collective common experience, it will further divide us in a way. I'm thinking about those things. And then I'm also thinking, on the other hand, that if public schools are to survive, in my opinion, we need to be as flexible as possible to meet the needs of 21st century kids. I mean, I've said it once, I'll say it again, the cemetery rows from the 1920s factory model is outdated. 42-minute period, 9 period a day days, where everybody is in their own silo, that's just not going to cut it. And I don't blame kids for going, what's the point of this? I can get it all online, and then I get my degree, and then I can find a job. And look, half the people who are rich, these YouTubers, nobody there has a degree, right? So there's a whole new world and marketplace evolving that I think school is not really the way we do school is not really keeping up with.
I had a buddy of mine was telling me about his kids who go to smaller schools. And last year, his kid worked online, did their homework, their assignments in about 2 hours. And they just powered through, got it done. They really liked not losing time with transferring, having to walk around, having to do this and that. And then they got to do the stuff they wanted to do, this experiential learning. But in a small setup, I can see how that works. And again, we have the paradigm of, for some people, the transition or the disruption gave them some powerful insights into learning and excitement. And for others, it further reinforced that they're not really part of society.
And that's the thing about public school in person is that I can control the resources and I can control the environment of these kids when they're here with me, and everybody's getting the same me on the same day and the same resources in the same environment. When they're not taking care of their younger brothers, or they're not worried about the dog barking or letting the dog out, or whatever's happening at home, they're with me. And frankly, being home or being in school, the most equitable of those two options is frankly being in school, right? Yeah. And so certainly I think kids who enjoyed being at home, there's a variety of reasons, but those who could really take advantage of it tended to come from homes where the resources to bring them to the museum in the afternoon, then if they finished all their work in the morning, or mom didn't have to work while the kids were in school, or dad didn't have to work while the kids were in school. And that wasn't everybody. That's the thing about public schools. It's the great equalizer. It should be the great equalizer.
Yeah. And two, what the kids lost was the interaction. In some regards, they lost an important piece, because back in the day when we talked about 21st century skills, it was about how to interact with people, how to work together, how to think together. Yeah. And that's what you seem to be highlighting this year in social emotional learning.
Oh, totally. Google did a survey in 2018. I forget what they called it, Project Oxygen or something. Anyway, they did this survey and they were trying to create an algorithm for hiring that mimicked their most productive workers, right? Mm-hmm. So what they found out was the top 8 skills had nothing to do with computers, computer science, math, or engineering. Nothing, 0. In fact, that was like number 9 on their list. And the top 7 or 8 skills were things like working together, coaching each other, showing respect for diverse opinions, being able to listen. There was all these soft skills that made all of these people super successful at Google. And I go back to that list, I don't know how many times a year, when I have conversations with parents about why we do what we do in the room, because they're not going to get a job because they got an A on the ancient Japan test. They're going to get a job because they can tackle something that they don't know very much about, learn about it, integrate it into their own learning, teach others about it, get other people doing a project that will demonstrate what they know. Like that's the kind of stuff that people are engaging in the workplace. And that should be the kind of stuff that they're engaging in at school.
Jennifer Wolfe, you're the New York State Teacher of the Year. I can see why. I want to sign up for your class.
We have a good time in there, the kids.
Yeah. Well, I find history and social studies and social sciences, what's the problem we're having during the pandemic? It isn't the medicine. It's how we resolve challenges.
Right.
It's where the Spanish flu and this problem have a lot of parallels. And one of the things in the 100 years is pretty clear. We haven't really changed as a species.
No. And I hope we don't waste a good crisis. I mean, I don't want to sound flip, but this is the time. If you look at history at all of these times when pandemics actually occurred throughout history, whether we're talking about the Black Plague, whatever. I mean, in Europe after 1348, we got a middle class, right? I mean, there are big, huge changes that happen if we're willing to really look and figure out what we did well, figure out what we fell short on, and then make the appropriate changes. And we're not going to do that unless we start talking to teachers. I'll tell you that right now.
And letting teachers bring teachers together to talk among themselves, because clearly what you and your colleagues learn from each other puts
So
that time
valuable.
in front of the students as really critical.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to thank you for taking the time today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love talking about teaching and kids, so anytime.
Well, if this were in a time capsule, how would you want to summarize it for people who find this up in the cloud 20 years from now?
The pandemic taught us that schools are more important than anything in helping our students and our countries and our world solve problems and come together to solve problems. We learned we really need schools. That's what we learned.
Well, Jennifer Wolfe of Oceanside School District on Long Island, I want to thank you for your time, but more importantly, just
Thank
thank
you,
you for
Richard.
you,
Thank you, Richard.
your
It's
gift
been
to
a pleasure.
public schools.
Thank you. Thank you so much.